My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, Mega Christmas, Grinch's franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And we are going into one of the most interesting subjects we've ever had on the Bat Jar podcast. Not really, but I'm glad we're talking about it. I was thinking about it. I think it was indeed I who put it in the Bat Jar originally.
Well, you know what? I think I know where this came from. I think it was when we were talking about fans. There was an episode where we were defining what a fan is, and I was bringing in how sports, because we were like, there was the nerd and geek thing, and then I was like, well, you know, there could be sports geeks, and then like
sport fans are,
and then there were fans, and I think somehow the conversation, got connected to esports that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because you get some pretty intense fans for esports too.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, first, we'd like to apologize to everybody. We did not put an episode last week. I was traveling for a wedding, and I greatly overestimated my ability to drive in a car for 12 hours and then function.
Yes. Well, we all want to believe we can do it, right?
Yes.
But,
it's
easier said than done for sure.
Yeah, so my apologies to everyone who was hoping to hear this episode last week. We weren't able to get it out. And again, we've been having this conversation for a while now. Our lives are busier than they were certainly when I started the podcast, and certainly for Beeper since he's been on the show. So we're going to try something a little different here. You guys can probably tell over the last, let's say, 6 months, haven't been the best at getting out episodes every single week. So what we're going to do for now is we're going to transition to having new episodes of the podcast every 2 weeks. This will give us more time to, prioritize other things in our lives, because this is just a hobby for us. But we want to make sure we're still able to put out as many episodes as we can for you guys, the listeners.
And, even though it's a hobby, it's something I think both of us do enjoy doing. And, I'm always sad when we can't do an episode in a week, but also it not being a professional thing, it being a hobby, it's hard to justify prioritizing it over some of the more important things that have been happening in our lives.
This is also going to be a special episode because I'm in the midst of doing laundry, and I live in a building where the laundry's in the basement, so my timer tells me I got to go switch my load in 12 seconds. So, Beeper, I'm going to run away. I'll leave it up to you. You can either try talking to the listeners yourself, or you can just leave silence that I will then edit out later.
Well, all right. Did you have any news items to touch on? Because we usually do that first. Well, we'll figure that out as we move on. We're going to try doing this. So, this is very difficult. I might just have awkward silence. Now, I know that Average Joe and I are coming from very different places here, as he's not a fan of esports. For those who don't remember, we're talking about esports today and why they are the greatest sports on Earth. But no, actually, we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of how they happened, how they arrived, and in some way the similarities that they do bear with actual sports, because I think and I will definitely talk about this more as our dear average Joe shares more of the details. But I do think that there's simultaneously more in common between the esports and quote unquote real sports, because there's a lot of things that are considered real sports that I think are less sporty than esports personally. Um, but I also think that it's not necessarily always to the greater benefit. So I think that I do believe that sometimes we kind of there is a tendency in the esports scene to get overly wrapped up in trying to be like sports, to the detriment of actually um, embracing what esport is and what makes it different and kind of its own thing. Because even though it's modeled after sports, it is a very different kind of atmosphere and a different kind of fandom. Um, Although that, like I said, there's a lot of similarities between the two that can't be completely ignored. So I'm just going to give that as my hot take for Average Joe shows up, and I will edit it out, me telling him about it.
Okay.
Okay, so you're right. Talking alone is weird and awkward. So TLDR, I basically said that I'm giving my take, which is that even though esport and sports share a lot in common, I think it's a mistake to try to do a 1-to-1 comparison of the two, and it's a detriment to esport and to sports.
Oh man, that takes some of the spice out of this conversation. Because part of having this conversation was to get at the root of why, or rather how, could electronic sports be kind of classified as sports? Because
I still think that as far because of how wide the definition is for sports these days, I do think that they should fit. But I think that despite a lot of similarities, there's enough differences that we should start looking at it as something that is perhaps slightly different.
Okay, here we go. The definition of the word sport, according to Google.
Oh, we didn't go Webster's. We went straight Google.
Well, Google takes this definition from, it says Oxford Languages, so.
Okay.
An activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment.
Interesting. It's interesting that entertainment is in there.
Yeah. I suppose that's true. Like most... Well, I think professional sports, I suppose it is for others' entertainment, but arguably, like if I just go play golf with somebody, it's for my own entertainment.
Yeah, but I feel like it kind of discounts the whole, which is to my advantage in the side of the debate I'm on, that it took away the kind of like health benefit idea of sport, right? Because like it talks about having like physical exertion, but like some people like just do sport, for exercise, and I feel like that definition like kind of cuts, yoga or like track running, like just running around a track for yourself out of the definition, right? Because you're not running for entertainment or for other people's entertainment. You're running for health reasons to, I guess people
if
don't
you're
say
just
jogging
if you're just running, that's not necessarily that's not a sport. That's just exercise.
I guess, but some people, but some
if
people,
you're in a marathon, you're competing against other people, and so you're running. Like, I suppose that's not well, for some people, watching races is entertaining.
Right, that's the thing, because there's that aspect of it, and then there's the aspect that like there are certain sports that people are doing pretty much primarily for health reasons, but other people can watch and be entertained by.
All right, let's break it a bit. I'm going to go to the Wikipedia page for sport. Sport pertains to any form of competitive physical activity or game that aims to use, maintain, or improve physical ability and skills while providing enjoyment to participants and, in some cases, entertainment to spectators.
Okay.
And then it goes on to say sports can improve one's physical health.
Right, but doesn't have to. But I honestly think that both these definitions, like the main problem with the first definition we have is going into whether there is physical exertion in esports. But other than that, there's no inherent problem with the definition, like with esports fitting that definition.
Yeah, so I mean, I get you can injure yourself. I get that it, like I can tell I've played enough video games to know that I do not have the finger dexterity and the hand-eye coordination. Like my hands do not work. I cannot, like most shooting games, you have one, joystick that kind of controls your movement up and down.
Yeah.
And another one that controls your movement moving like left to right, side to side. And my hands are not coordinated enough to actually seamlessly maneuver my character around the way I see other people do. So hand movements are,
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like, I know that that's kind of a difficult thing to get through, but at the same time, like, if dart is to be considered a sport, the physical exertion for that is relatively the same, like, is pretty similar, right? Like, how much are you actually exerting yourself throwing a dart?
Yeah,
right.
And
it is
chess.
a lot more about the skills and the concentration than the actual physical exertion happening.
Yeah, like chess, billiards, spelling bees can be on, like I've seen them on TSN.
I've never seen chess on TSN. And that's another interesting thing is I do think that, like, there is a difference between something like chess, like, and that's also where I think the conversation is interesting depending on your definition, because there are video games, that are turn-based, that don't require people to actually have, rapid twitch reflexes in order to be good at it, that are, you have the time you have, that are, much more akin to chess. And I think those, it's harder to make a point that they are a sport. And they are a lot more of a game like chess. But then you do have a lot that require, kind of insane amount of reflexes and, and also like team coordination. Most of the, well, not most, but a fair number of esports, like the big competitive esports, are team based, right? I'm thinking about, League of Legends, Dota, all the MOBAs, but as well as like
Overwatch, is that a team one?
Yeah, Overwatch, Call of Duty, pretty much any shooter that has a competitive scene, as far as I know, is always, except maybe like competitive Fortnite, I think might be an individual skill kind of thing.
Now, are there esports for like the sports games, like for FIFA or like?
Yes, definitely, 100%.
Because that's almost getting meta.
Yeah, no, they definitely are competitions. It has, to my knowledge, it's not like leagues. It's more, championships and tournaments kind of level, because there aren't that many esports that have kind of a regular league associated with it, right?
Okay, here's a paragraph from the Wikipedia article that might help us. Sport is generally recognized as system of activities based on physical athleticism or physical dexterity, with major competitions such as the Olympic Games admitting only sports that meet this definition. Other organizations, such as the Council of Europe, precludes activities without a physical element from classification as sports. However, a number of competitive but non-physical activities claim recognition as mind sports. The International Olympic Committee recognizes both chess and bridge as bona fide sports, and Sport Accord, the International Sports Federation Association, recognizes 5 non-physical sports: bridge, chess, checkers, go, and how do I pronounce this? Zhang, or Chinese chess, Zhang Qi.
Okay.
So this idea of a mind sport, that's a term I've never heard before. A mind sport is a game of skill based on intellectual ability. Could we
Yeah,
count
and I
video
feel like
games as
through
mind
something like
sport?
that, online card games definitely, something like Hearthstone, would definitely fit into that. And so too would like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering, however,
Right.
Although, yes, because bridge does involve chance. Because I was going to say, like, chess doesn't involve, theoretically, chess doesn't involve any chance, right? It is a purely skill-based game because there's never anything that is going to change.
I'll be honest, I know nothing about bridge. I just know it's something my grandma used to go and do.
But you still deal cards, which means there is a random, even though it's mostly skill, there is a random aspect to it, kind of like crib.
Right. But I think if I heard you correctly earlier, you were trying to say that, just because it's called an esport doesn't mean it has to necessarily be a sport. We're trying to find a way to fit competitive video games into the definition, like the formal definitions of what sports are.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is that some of the esports definitely do, and some it's a lot harder to kind of get into that to prove that they fit the definition, I guess.
This might be a good time for me to jump in with my secret origin segment when it comes to esports, because when I first heard the term esports, I got angry because my impression was that people who spend all their time playing video games were trying to find a way to justify their activity of playing video games all the time. And,
right.
And sports, whether you like it or not, when you're a kid and you're going to school, they make you go to gym class. They try to encourage you to participate in team sports, regardless if you enjoy it or not, regardless if you have the athletic ability or not, because they're just trying to help you develop, a healthy lifestyle. And because sports can be fun, it's a good way to get exercise. So the fear I had when I heard the term esports is that we're going to build a generation of kids who are going to consider playing video games their sports, and that they're not going to get any physical activity because they're going to spend all this time playing sports.
To be fair, there is an aspect of that happening.
Well, has it been long enough since esports have been around that we can? Well, you're a teacher. I suppose you would notice.
I have noticed. Like, there is part of that is kind of happening. Like, you do have, but it hasn't gotten to the point where people replace sport with it, but it has definitely gotten to the point where, like, kids will take esports more seriously than sports, right? Like, I don't think it's gotten to the point where, like, as a society, we accept that esports are a way that people can get their exercise. But we do kind of start to give acknowledgement to the people who do it, and to say that this is something that can be very important to these children, right?
Yeah.
And something I think also that, does help them. Like, we are recognizing more and more that, like, some of the benefits you get from sports, not exercise, but the other kind of benefits, are kind of happening, right? Like you do, like the teamwork aspect, the creativity aspect, a lot of that does still come through in esports. If not all of them, but some of them, and it can have, it can still be very beneficial to kids for all the non-physical reasons that sports are beneficial to kids.
And I believe that, but my concern is that we're gonna have a generation of unhealthy children. Because,
Yeah, and I don't think it's gotten there because we haven't gotten to the point where we like do esports and gym.
Yeah, like, when that day comes, that is the day I will riot.
Okay, yeah. I think rioting is a bit much, but I can agree with you that that's not something we should aspire to.
This is my train of thought. There are kids who want to become professional basketball players, so they spend a ton of time practicing, playing basketball, being on basketball teams, with in the pursuit of becoming a professional athlete. What if some kids decides they want to become a professional esport player, gamer, whatever, and so they decide to dedicate the same amount of time and effort into really getting really good at a video game? There's something uncomfortable for me of having a kid sit in front of a screen for that, the amount of time that the same kid would spend like practicing basketball, practicing a video game.
See, the thing is, where I think it is a little bit different is that, and this is something that I know because I've done sports and I've worked as a coach, is that people who only do one sport tend to not become the best at it. It's a weird thing, but most like great athletes, people who really made it big, are people who played several different sports when they were young, but specialized in one later on. And it's something that I remember a while back. There were professional gamers who talked about that most of them did other sports. Like, they just eventually esport became more important to them, or they just like they and again, one of the things that has started to change is that people are realizing that even though esports are more about concentration and reflexes and so on, being healthy enhances all of those things anyways, right? And so there is this idea now, like we're pretty far from the the stereotype, that South Park episode where they're playing World of Warcraft and they're all getting fat and sitting in their chair. Like, that's not what a professional gamer looks like, right? Most of them are actually quite fit and do like daily exercise and meditation and have this kind of healthier lifestyle. And I understand what you mean, that children spending that much time on video games is not a good thing. And having an unhealthy amount of focus on that. But at the same time, you can get an unhealthy amount of focus on an actual sport too. Like, you can overwork, I'll take an example from my life. I was a competitive swimmer and I overworked certain parts. I slacked off on certain parts of my stroke and overworked different parts of my body because of I wasn't practicing well enough. And when we did do cross fitness, like different exercises that weren't strictly swimming, I slacked off on those, and as a result I got a pretty bad muscle imbalance that wound up getting me injured and knocking me out of competition for a few months. And so I think that risk still exists with any kind of sport or any really any obsession or any job that a kid wants to do where he puts everything into it, still has that risk. It's just that video games have that idea that you have to be inside, but even the idea that like gamers or loners or people who don't make friends is very much disappearing, especially, and I'm thinking that it's probably going to be even less of a stereotype after the pandemic, because we have all been communicating online for 2 years. We're realizing that yes, it's not the same as socialization, but in the absence of other things, it's still a substitute for it. And that's what you're seeing is, with things, programs like Discord becoming very popular, not just for video games, but for other, for social, as a social media outlet. People are realizing that, well, socialization is changing, and kids who talk while playing video games probably end up socializing more than kids who did sports together, because there's a lot of sports that doesn't allow you to talk as much.
That'll be an interesting study to do in like 15, 20 years to see, which group of children are more socialized or whatever. Because you would think that there's something that comes from being in the same physical space as people, regardless of how much you're actually talking to each other. But at the same time, you're right. There is more opportunity. And I guess if it's people you actually know in real life, it's different. I'm thinking more like developing parasocial relationships with people you've never met in person before.
Yeah. And again, that used to be more of a thing before, gaming houses became kind of the norm for professional gamers, right? And even for streamers, like people who just play video games professionally but not in competition, there are streamers who have created gaming houses where they live together with other content creators just, to be together. But definitely competitive esport teams tend to live together and to share, a house, which is a lot less of a parasocial experience than it used to be, where you'd because early tournaments, it was, you meet these people online and you never see each other, and unless there's a LAN event, which was pretty rare for a long time, you would never actually go places with them.
Okay, we got to my secret origin, which was pretty shallow, but I think you probably have a better secret origin segment for the topic of esports.
I don't know if it's better. I think I was introduced to esports via League of Legends. I mean, kind of. So I played a lot of Age of Empires when I was a kid. A teenager, mostly. I didn't really play video games at all when I was a kid. And Age of Empires is one of those kind of older esports, because there were professional tournaments, or have been professional tournaments of the Age of Empires games for a really long time. Along with like StarCraft, they were some of the earlier games to get, tournaments with prize money. It wasn't like leagues or organized the way it is these days. But so I played with my friends a lot, and we had LAN parties. But I was aware that there were people who did it professionally. That there were tournaments with prize money for them, right? I also had a friend in high school who was part of a gaming guild that went to tournaments and that had prize money. So I was a little bit more aware of it. But it is really in university when I started playing League of Legends, and it was a fun game. But then my brother, who's the one who got me into it, was like, "Oh, you gotta check this out." And he showed me this video of the Intel Extreme Masters tournament, which was the first time, for those who play League of Legends, it was the first tournament where Moscow 5 showed up. And they became kind of a really big deal in esports in League of Legends esports scene for a while. And yeah, there was a small crowd. There weren't a lot of people, but there was a small crowd. There was I think it was $15,000 for the number one team that was split, 5 ways between all the players, most of which had to pay to go to the tournament. So it ended up not being that much money, but, there was a prize pool for it. There was a team playing together. There were casters. There was a crowd cheering, and that was my first introduction. And then very quickly, and then he also showed me the Season 1 finals of League of Legends, which, again, was just a tournament. I think there had been an online tournament, and then the top, 8 teams went to a LAN event and played the tournament, and then the winners won. Again, it wasn't a huge amount of money, but then Season 2 of League of Legends had a $2 million prize pool between all the tournaments and an organized, final tournament at the end, and that's when I actually started being interested in following esports. and I ended up following the. I've been following the European League of Legends scene pretty consistently since then.
See, that's a much more interesting origin story than mine.
Yeah, I
My-
guess you didn't have any friends in high school who were part of like a guild or who like did tournaments for.
No,
video
all
games
my
or anything
friends
like
were guys who played sports. Like they kind of got into Call of Duty and Smash Brothers. Like we played those kind of video games, but never
Yeah.
really. No PC gamers in my friend group, and
And never to the point where they would go to tournaments for it either, right?
certainly not. No.
Yeah.
But you used the term LAN party and LAN event. I know what those are, but I'm sure there's people who are going to listen to this that won't. So could you maybe just give an explanation what that refers to?
Yeah, so LAN is an abbreviation for local area network. It's basically it's a connection. It's a connection that is not done over the internet. Is the simplest way to put it. So
Oh, is
a
that
LAN
what it
party.
is?
Hmm?
I thought it was just everyone plugged into Ethernet in the same room.
well, yeah, it's a local area.
Uh,
It's not done over the. You don't need to have an internet connection in order to have a LAN connection.
Gotcha.
Basically. And so a LAN party was when everybody grabbed their computer, went to somebody's house, and plugged them all together. And this was at the time when all computer monitors were CRT screens, so they were massive, and it would take nobody had a laptop, so you had to bring a massive desktop to your friend's house, and we'd all play together, and we'd have to patch the game so that we were all playing on the same version. So somebody had like the file for the patch on at first it was on a CD and then it was on a USB drive. And we'd have to make sure it would take a good hour before everybody was ready to start playing.
That
And then we'd
sounds
play for, 5 hours.
terrible.
It was amazing. They usually went pretty late.
Can I assume it got pretty hot in those rooms? All those computers running.
Absolutely, it was that was kind of terrible. But eventually, because one of my friends, he and his older brother both really liked playing Age of Empires, and so they actually ended up having a dedicated room for it that had a big window and some fans in it, and little card tables set up to play. And likewise, when somebody talks about a LAN event, it is a live. It's a live event where people are playing on the same network instead of playing via the internet.
All right, so I have to go change my laundry again, but I'm going to set you up with something to talk about while I'm gone. When I was a kid, my dad would watch golf, and I found it tremendously boring. I couldn't get into it. But then I started learning how to play golf, and I came to realize how difficult it was to play golf. And I would then watch golf on TV and be just amazed by the quality of the professional golfers. So while I'm getting laundry done, maybe you can share about your experience transitioning from just playing League of Legends to then seeing people do it professionally.
So it was kind of interesting because that fated day where my brother showed me the game was pretty early on when I was playing, so I did not spend a whole lot of time watching people. I didn't spend a lot of time playing the game without seeing people play it professionally. And I think that it was definitely something that influenced my gaming because, like you said, with golf, you definitely have a better appreciation for something that seems boring when you know how to play it. I mean, I've had that with regular sports as well. I mean, I remember watching the Olympics as a kid. There was no reason for me to be interested in the swimming events, but when I became a competitive swimmer in high school, suddenly it was, some of the events that I wanted to see the most. And there was some of that, with playing League of Legends. But at the same time, I have recently found that I've been able to watch people play video games that I don't actually play. And so, like, there is an aspect of, definitely an aspect that, like, yes, you need to know the game in order to fully enjoy some of it. But there's also, it's presented in such a way now that even if you, and again, because we've changed the way that we consume video game as a medium pretty severely, especially because of YouTube and because streamers are a thing, you can get people who don't play a video game but who enjoy the personality of a YouTuber or a streamer who will get very much into the video game and start developing an affinity for it and then start, watching it. And there are people who watch competitive sports that don't necessarily play the sport. They don't have the same level of appreciation, but they know somebody who does, or they, follow somebody who does, and they decide that, no, I'm interested in this. And I find that that's something we are seeing more and more. Again, like, I can give an example. Mjolnir got really, really into the video game Undertale, and she had never played this game before. Now, Undertale isn't a game that, has a competitive scene, but just because of YouTubers playing games and streamers playing game, somebody can be interested enough that they would be willing to watch somebody play a game competitively, even if they don't play it themselves. But it's definitely better if you play the game.
Oh, I'm sure that was all very insightful. Oh man, I tried to do it as fast as I could. How long was I gone for?
Not very long, because I thought for sure I was going to run out of things to say, but I didn't.
Okay, so I thought an interesting way to talk about esports is that I found a YouTube video, 15 things you didn't know about the esports industry, and I thought maybe if we could read through some of the comments on here and see if we if we agree with the comment, it would be like giving it a bat cookie. If we disagree, give it a bat noogie.
Oh, I like this format.
All right, so Wealth Builders TV says, I never really thought about esports as an industry. This is definitely an industry to look at.
I mean, yeah, it's gotten really, like, not just the bat cookie, because like it is generating a lot of money and creating a lot of jobs, right? Because it is no longer just a couple of guys bussing somewhere, usually for a pre-existing event that also had a tournament attached to it. It is, stadiums being filled. It is sponsorship deals being made, like teams having sponsors. Like, I follow the Fnatic League of Legends teams quite closely, and they have, they've done contracts with Gucci and made commercials and photo shoots for them. They've done it for, I can't remember, it was either Ferrari or Fiat, I can't remember, but with cars, like they are starting to look a lot more like professional athletes in as far as like endorsements and having, specific sponsors that are going beyond just, obviously, Razer or people who did like PCs and accessories for games were pretty early at being sponsors, but now you get real companies sponsoring these teams and athletes. So, it's creating a lot of money. And like, I know I've said this before, but like there's, I think, 6 competitive League of Legends leagues, like professional leagues, that are, at least 4 of them are run by Riot Games, by the company who makes the game, and for the longest time that was their only game. So they had enough revenue to be able to run 4 professional leagues. That's an industry.
All I'll say, bad cookie. Peso H says, teamwork, strategy, coaching, fans, ... All of it is in esports, ... Then it is a sport. And then he puts, or I don't know, they disclose Dota 2 player here. So I'm going to give this comment to Bat Noogie because clearly the person's biased.
I'd say, again, I'd give it a sensation Bat Cookie. Like, again, I haven't talked about this, but these kinds of things are true of some esports, and more of them. And like, yeah, you do have coaches, athletes. They do actually get like athletes. The equivalent of an athlete visa in the United States for esport is available, as well as the equivalent. You do get esports scholarships in a lot of universities in Europe and North America. So like yes, he's biased, but there is a lot of esport that has gotten to that level. But again, I do think that within esports there should be a distinction between games that are team slash skill based and games that are strategy based, because I do think they belong in different categories.
Shane Patton says, when the competition is good and the stakes are high, you definitely have a raised heart rate and will break out into a sweat. Definitely a sport.
I mean, I don't know if I fully agree that sweating is what makes it a sport. So I'll say Thin Station. I'll say a Bat Noogie, but it is absolutely true.
I'll give him a Thin Station Bat Cookie. I like his logic there. Okay, Glad of War says, seriously.
I'm sorry, if sweating made it a sport, dating for me would have been a sport.
Glad of War says, seriously, I haven't even wanted it yet. I'm a Lyft driver and streamer. I just had to pull over and say, I love all the team's work. You guys put so much effort into being such a... Oh, this is more an affirmation of the YouTube channel, not the esports. Okay. Bat Noogie.
As it's irrelevant to our conversation.
Yeah. Amari Cristiano says, Optic Gaming has done a lot for this industry.
Yeah.
What's Optic Gaming? Do you know what that is?
I'm gonna double check with Google, but I believe that it's it's an esport team, well, organization. I don't know if I'd put Optic as far up as something like TSM, CLG, or Fnatic, because they are organization that also have multidisciplinary, like they've got teams in at least 2 or 3 different esport categories, and they have done a lot to legitimize it. I don't know Optic that well, but I'm guessing they're in that list of like kind of big organizations that have had teams in different sport, like in different games, different esport categories, and have given them support, both financially but also like infrastructure support. And they have definitely done a lot to help esport get to the point where it's at. Because that is one of the things that, like, we didn't talk about it, but there are, organizations and teams. Like, when esports started, it was just like get enough people together with you. And even like competitive esport was like a bunch of high level players would message each other, form a team, and start playing. That's not really what's happening now. Now you have organizations who sponsor a team, give and pay the salary of their coaches, of their sometimes their salary, and pay for the gaming house, their gear, help them to go and very much act like a sport team organization would, and that has definitely gone a really long way to make it a legitimate career path, which obviously helps the industry.
I'm gonna give this guy a Bat Noogie. Doesn't sound convincing enough.
Fair enough.
Masher Media. Oh, sorry. What are you gonna give him?
Oh, I'm gonna say a Bat Cookie. I don't want to bash Optic as a team. I don't know them that well, but it doesn't mean they haven't done a lot.
Masher Media says the industry will become 100 times bigger when there are actual good games to play.
I mean, I'll give that a Bat Noogie. I think there are excellent games out right now that people are playing competitively, and there has been since the 80s. So, Bat Noogie.
I want to give it a Bat Cookie just for the boldness.
That's fair.
Bayan Baldrez. Isn't chess considered a sport? Real question. I think MOBAs are very similar, except with an added element of team coordination. I believe esports should be considered a real sport.
I do think that, if you're stretching chess into it being a sport, yes, most esports are sports. Again, the thing about MOBAs specifically, which for those who don't know, massive online battle arena is what a MOBA is. Games like League of Legends, Smite, uh, Dota, all those kind of games where you have a team, each one of them has a character, and they're kind of on this battlefield, and you can fight anybody on the other team. I would agree, but the problem is that unlike chess, there isn't like I don't like the comparison with chess because, as I said, chess has a finite amount of moves you can do. It's a very large amount, but it is finite. It has specific rules that are completely unchanging at all times, and so the physical and mental skills are very different. And even with a timer for your moves, you still have a lot of time to think about things. You don't have to react and have good reaction time along with your teamwork.
So what does Brian get? Is he a bat noogie?
He gets a light bat noogie.
Okay, a 2-finger bat noogie.
For saying that MOBAs are like chess.
Okay, I'll agree with you there. The HVK, I remember way back when MLG Halo was 100 people in a conference room with a $500 prize pool. Man, how have things changed?
For those who don't know, MLG, Major League Gaming, it's the esport equivalent of the MLB, but it's much smaller because esports are not where they're at in baseball. But I was talking about that, and it is pretty incredible that it used to be there'd be these tournaments, but usually they were at events that already had to do with either video game conferences. Like E3 would have a Smash Bros tournament. They still do, but that used to be all it was, right? But now you have events that are very specific about it. The industry has gone a really long way for sure.
Okay, so with that in mind, I'll give that a bat cookie.
Yeah,
that's good context. Tom Schulter says, I think esports should be considered a real sports, but I don't think it fits to the Olympics.
I agree, actually, for a couple of reasons. One of them being that the Olympics has different standards for sports than other things, but also the Olympics, for something to get to the Olympics, it needs to be something that is both more or less universally accessible. Not always. There are a lot of exceptions, but there needs to be a certain degree of accessibility to it and of universality to it. And I don't think esports are there. Maybe they will get there at some point, but they're definitely not there yet. Look, it would be boring because Korea and China would get all the gold medals, and then maybe random European countries would get other medals. But the other thing is that because of the time in which esports became a thing, it is very little nationalized outside of Korea and China. And even there, you do get players from North America and Europe that go play. And the other thing is that's the thing. The distinction is you've got, for not all esports, for League of Legends, it's definitely that. But for most of them, is you've got China, Korea, then all of Europe is one thing. And all of North America is one thing because it isn't divided in countries. And then sometime South America will have something, and other parts of the world, like Oceania or specific parts, will have a thing. But there's definitely the separations are very broad, not really by country.
I'll give them a bat noogie just because I don't understand his point of it's a sport, but it shouldn't be in the big competition for sports.
I think it's a sport, but it doesn't yet have the recognition that would be necessary to do the Olympics, because there are a lot of sports that aren't in the Olympics because they're kind of very specific, I don't think Quidditch, I do know people play Quidditch as a sport. Like, it's not the real thing; they're not flying, but I do think that's a sport, or at least a game that has sport-like qualities. But I don't think it should go to the Olympics because it's not something everyone in the world would want.
Right. Dragoness PvP says, you actually can sweat a lot playing a game, but where sports test the body, esports test the mind. Times are changing. Video games are very good for the mind. A lot of people don't think it's an actual sport because you don't run around and potential hurt you are yourself. You won't be breaking your bones and cause bad physical damage playing a video game. Just get exercise and give your eyes a break now and then, and it's already safer than sports.
I'm going to give this guy a bat cookie just because of what he's saying. And there is a degree of that. Like, my school has an esport club. And the teacher who's in charge of it, she's a very big advocate of this idea that it has benefits that are often overlooked because it's a video game. I'm not saying it's not on par with sports for a lot of things, but for some things like teamwork, cooperation, there is a lot of that does happen in esports, and I think people sleep on it a little bit too much. I'm not going to say that video games should be universally accepted as being this great positive thing, because they're not universally a great positive thing. Neither are sports. There's a lot of problems in certain sports culture that are starting to get addressed, but that weren't for a long time. And, esports has similar issues with it, and, other hobbies that are helpful for, I think D&D is great for teamwork and developing social skills, but there are definitely a lot of problems within the global Dungeons and Dragons community that make it not 100%, competitive, or, I wouldn't say Dungeons and Dragons is a sport, even though there are competitions. People do, by some of the definitions we've had of sports, you could argue that it fits in there.
I'll give him a bat nuggie just because he makes the assumption that sports only test the body, and I will tell you most of the physical,
actually, that's true.
Most of the sports I've played are mental games as much as they're physical. So sorry,
no, you're right about. I agree with you there. I don't think it's enough to make it, but it might be enough to make it a thin station bat cookie instead of a full on healthy bat cookie.
Christian Saber, my friend are in sports, but I'm not interested. He convinced me, but I'm not doing progress. But I'm going a progress making business idea. Thanks for reading this.
Maybe we should vet these a little bit better before reading them.
Yeah, I'm just seeing a lot of people repeating the same thing. Okay, here's a spicy one, I think. VamC Reddy says, video games remove stress, improve strategy skills. You can think really fast.
Again, I do think that this is true, and there are benefits to it, but I also don't like the idea of putting forth, there are benefits to video games, therefore they should be okay and they should be considered a sport, because that's not true either. And yeah, they can reduce stress. They can also cause immense amount of stress. If you get yourself tilted, if you just keep playing to try to win when you really should be stopping to give yourself a mental break, it can do the exact opposite of that as well. And even just the, you won't injure yourself. You can injure yourself playing video games, especially if you do, if you're sitting in an unergonomic chair for 8 hours a day, regardless of what you're doing, you'll injure yourself.
Yeah, I don't know about video games necessarily removing stress. That's part of the reason why I stopped playing more video games, is because I found I was getting too agitated.
Yeah, and I definitely understand that. It's why I've changed which games I play. I play less because I have less time, but also I have changed the video games that I played and, lessened them for that exact reason. Yeah.
All right, so I'll give that guy a bat noogie. What are you going to give him?
I'm going to give him two-fingered bat noogie. His heart was in the right place, but he's making assumptions.
Hamza Malik, League of Legends heart.
Oh, the biggest bat cookie.
Yeah, I figured you would. I'll give it a back kick. Why not? Okay, here we go. This is spicy. Alex G says, "E-sports? ... No. ... E-gamers maybe, but in no way are they sports. ... Lol."
I mean,
Alex is having. He should listen to this podcast.
but I think again, I don't think that people who want to make a distinction between games and sports are in the wrong. Like I said, there's a lot of similarities, but I do think that having a distinct category with distinct definitions to differentiate between, you know, a gamer game, a gamer sport, like, is not a bad idea. I understand that people are fighting it because they want some of them to be legitimized, and I think that is an effort that was worthwhile. But I think that as the industry is developing, it has the opportunity to create its own identity. And like, even within sports, not all sports have the same structure. Like, how many, you know, they'll have regular season and playoffs. Esports have that too, but the way that playoffs work for pretty much every sport is slightly different, right? Some are direct elimination, some are series, some are a tournament at the end of it instead. Like, there isn't, you know, a universal way for sport to exist either. So
Yeah,
you
Bat
know,
Noogie. Sorry,
you know,
Alex.
yeah, it's, you're also being reductivist.
Pentru Barbati says, For me is a stupidity and a disgrace that this is called a sport."
I mean, again, a stupidity might be a bit, you know, overly zealous, because, like, again, I think there are a lot of similarities that can be put between sports, especially how it's developed. But at the same time, it is also partially because esports have developed themselves following the model of competitive and professional sports, right? If they'd followed a different model, it might be something entirely different, and then you would be having a completely different conversation about it. But they chose to kind of aim for that, and so I think it's not a joke. It's something very serious and something a lot of people have put a lot of effort into. But should it be that way? That's a conversation that's a lot more complicated than just saying, "Oh, it's people who aren't exercising," you know.
Yeah, I'll give this person a Bat Noogie. One last comment. As we're getting towards the bottom, I'm noticing, as I'm scrolling farther down, this is where the more negative comments are. But our last comment from Darren Surrey. "Nope, don't get it. And I play games every day."
And you know what? I know people who play sports who don't like watching sports. Like,
That's a
you
good
know,
point. Yep.
like, and I know that, like, I've had this conversation with Mjolnir. She dislikes watching soccer just as much as she dislikes watching League of Legends. She doesn't really enjoy either one of them. To her, they are equally not something she enjoys. So I think that there is something there that, yeah, it's not for everybody. Not everybody understands it, but that shouldn't affect the legitimacy of it as a form of entertainment or a form of, or as a recognized sport, as it were.
Well, I think that's going to be a good spot to wrap it up for today. I know we didn't get into too much of the history of esports or even just getting to some of the notable players or teams or what have you. But after having this conversation, I feel comfortable enough kind of acknowledge that, you know, sport is not a word that can be clearly defined. It's not black and white. And so there is, whether it's you're referring to it as like a mind sport or if you're choosing to define another way, I see no issue with considering esports games or sports rather. And it'll be interesting to see what happens to the next generation as kids grow up, and if we're able to, if there's going to be space, like if the
people,
increased presence of esports will lead to a decline in like people actually playing physical sports.
People our age are pretty much the generation that had to make it happen. But like I said, yeah, like I have students, like they're of the generation that's seeing it already existing, right? Like you talk to any of my students about esports, there are still some who say it's not a sport, but all of them have heard about it and know that some people do consider it to be a sport.
So, I mean, where do you go from here if you want to learn more about esports? Beeper, where would be a good place for people to go to if they wanted to learn more about esports after this episode?
Check out MLG, Major League Gaming. They do actually have a lot of information. If you play a game already, try to see if there is a competitive scene. There probably is. Tournaments and competitive scenes are like speed runs. They do exist. You just got to find them.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
So now it's time to go inside the Bat Jar and find out what we're going to talk about when our next episode comes out in 2 weeks. Oh man, Beeper, what does that say? Can you read that?
Firefly and Serenity. I like it.
So we did do an episode on Firefly. That was our 100th episode back in the day. So I guess maybe I should watch the Serenity movie, or maybe I should finish Firefly because
Yeah, finish Firefly and watch Serenity.
okay.
No, watch Serenity. Honestly, how much of Firefly have you seen?
I think I saw the first like 4 or 5 episodes.
You've met the Doctor and his sister, right?
I don't know, man. This was back in 2018 when we were.
Okay,
I don't
but
really remember.
No, you've met all the relevant people. You could watch the movie without watching the rest of it.
Yeah, I think it's all on Disney Plus now, so it'll be easy for me to find.
Oh, well, there you go.
So there you go. Come back to the Bat Jar Podcast in 2 weeks when we talk about Firefly and Serenity. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
Hey guys, how do reavers clean their harpoons? Punchline next episode.